My name is Iris, and I am 32 years old. Right now, I am sitting in my wheelchair in the living room of my new apartment, watching my daughter Lily draw pictures on the floor. There's a metal rod inside my left leg now, and every time the weather changes, I remember that night. People always ask me how I survived, and the answer is sitting right in front of me. That night, my 5-year-old daughter stood between me and death. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you believe that a child's love can create miracles, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. This story is not easy for me to tell, but I want to share it because maybe someone out there is going through something similar and needs to know they are not alone. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I met Derek 8 years ago at a small coffee shop near the hospital where I worked as a nurse. It was one of those ordinary Tuesday mornings when the line was too long and I was running late for my shift. Derek was standing right in front of me, and when he turned around, he accidentally bumped into me and spilled his coffee all over my scrubs. I remember being so annoyed at first, but then he started apologizing so profusely that I could not help but laugh. He offered to buy me a new coffee and insisted on paying for my dry cleaning. That was our first conversation. Derek had just moved to the city to work as a construction engineer for a big company. He was charming in a quiet way. He did not try to impress me with fancy words or expensive gestures. Instead, he listened. He genuinely listened when I talked about the stress of being a nurse, about the patients who broke my heart, about the small victories that made it all worth it. In a world where everyone seemed to be waiting for their turn to speak, Derek actually heard me. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. It was not some grand gesture in a crowded restaurant or a surprise trip to Paris. It was a simple picnic at the same park where we had our first real date. He had packed my favorite sandwiches and a bottle of cheap wine, and as the sun was setting, he pulled out a small velvet box. The ring was modest, nothing extravagant, but when he slipped it on my finger and asked me to spend the rest of my life with him, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. I said yes, without a moment of hesitation. Our wedding was small, just family and close friends, in a little chapel outside of town. My mother, Brenda, cried the entire ceremony. My brother, Marcus, gave a toast that made everyone laugh. Derek's parents flew in from across the country, and his mother hugged me and whispered that she was so happy her son had found someone like me. That night, dancing with Derek in the small reception hall, I truly believed I had found my forever. 2 years into our marriage, Lily was born. I will never forget the moment the doctor placed her in my arms. She was so tiny with a full head of dark hair and the most perfect little fingers. Derek stood beside me, and when he looked at his daughter for the first time, tears streamed down his face. He kept saying she was beautiful, that we had made this perfect little human, that he could not believe how lucky he was. In that hospital room, holding our newborn daughter, I felt like our family was complete. The early years of parenthood were exhausting in the best possible way. Lily was not an easy baby. She had colic and would cry for hours in the middle of the night. Derek and I would take turns walking her around the house, bouncing her gently singing songs neither of us could remember the words to. We were sleep-deprived zombies stumbling through our days, but we were in it together. Derek would come home from work and immediately take Lily so I could shower or just sit in silence for a few minutes. He changed diapers without complaining. He learned to make her favorite purees from scratch because she refused the store-bought ones. When Lily was 2, we finally saved enough money to buy our first house. It was a small place in the suburbs, nothing fancy, but it had a backyard where Lily could play and a kitchen big enough for family dinners. I remember the day we moved in carrying boxes while Lily toddled around exploring every corner. Derek set up her room first, painted it a soft lavender because that was my favorite color. He hung fairy lights around her crib and placed a small stuffed elephant on her pillow. That night, after Lily was asleep, Derek and I sat on the floor of our empty living room eating pizza straight from the box, talking about all the memories we would make in this house. For the next few years, life was good. Not perfect, but good. Derek worked hard and got promoted twice. I continued my nursing career, switching to the day shift so I could be home with Lily in the evenings. We fell into a comfortable routine. Weekday dinners around the kitchen table where Lily would tell us about preschool and Derek would share stories about his construction projects. Weekend mornings at the park pushing Lily on the swings until our arms were tired. Movie nights cuddled on the couch, Lily always falling asleep before the credits. But about 18 months before that terrible night, something began to change. Derek was assigned to lead a major construction project, the biggest of his career. At first, I was proud of him. This was the recognition he had worked so hard for. But the project consumed him. He started leaving earlier in the mornings and coming home later at night. Dinner grew cold on the table more often than not. When he did come home, he was distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. I would ask about his day and he would give me one-word answers before retreating to his phone. I told myself it was just stress. Big projects came with big pressure. Derek was carrying a heavy load and I needed to be supportive, not demanding. So I picked up the slack. I handled all the household chores alone. I took care of Lily by myself most days. I made excuses to her when she asked why Daddy did not play with her anymore. I became both mother and father, convincing myself it was temporary. Then came the evening I found the first real sign that something was wrong. I was doing laundry, sorting through the week's dirty clothes when I picked up one of Derek's dress shirts. I brought it to my nose to check if it needed stain treatment, and that is when I smelled it. Perfume. A floral, expensive scent that was definitely not mine. I stood frozen in the laundry room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My mind raced through explanations. Maybe he had been in a crowded elevator. Maybe a female colleague had hugged him after a meeting. Maybe it was nothing. I chose to believe it was nothing. I put the shirt in the washing machine and watched the water fill the drum, watched it wash away the evidence along with my suspicions. That night, I looked out the window at Derek pushing Lily on her swing in the backyard, her laughter floating through the air, and I convinced myself that I was being paranoid. Our family was happy. Our marriage was strong. I was imagining problems where there were none. I went to bed that night telling myself everything was fine. But deep down in a place I was not ready to acknowledge, a seed of doubt had been planted. The months that followed my discovery of the perfume were marked by a slow, agonizing shift in my marriage. Derek's distance grew more pronounced with each passing week. Where he once asked about my day at the hospital, now he barely looked up from his phone when I walked through the door. Our conversations, which used to flow so easily, became strained and superficial. We talked about bills and schedules and Lily's activities, but never about us, never about feelings, never about dreams. Lily noticed it too. Children are perceptive in ways adults often underestimate. She started asking why Daddy never read her bedtime stories anymore. She wanted to know why he did not come to her dance recitals. Once she asked me if Daddy was mad at her, and my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I hugged her tight and promised her that Daddy loved her very much, that he was just busy with work. But even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if I was lying to my daughter. I tried everything I could think of to reconnect with Derek. I planned romantic dinners after Lily went to bed, complete with candles and his favorite meals. He would pick at his food, check his phone constantly, and excuse himself early to answer work calls. I suggested weekend getaways, just the two of us, thinking maybe we needed time alone. He said the project was at a critical phase and he could not take time off. I bought new lingerie, thinking maybe our physical connection could reignite something. He turned away from me in bed, claiming he was too exhausted. The rejection stung more each time. I started to feel invisible in my own home, like a ghost drifting through rooms that used to feel warm and full of love. I looked in the mirror and wondered what had changed. Was I less attractive? Had motherhood and the demands of nursing aged me in ways I had not noticed? I scrutinized every wrinkle, every extra pound, every gray hair, convincing myself that I was the problem. It was around this time that Derek and I had our first real fight about money. I was balancing our checkbook one evening when I noticed a large withdrawal from our joint account, nearly $3,000. When I asked Derek about it, he barely looked up from his laptop. He said it was for the project, some expenses he had to cover up front that would be reimbursed later. I accepted the explanation, though something felt off. We'd always discussed major purchases and withdrawals. This felt secretive. A few weeks later, I saw more unusual charges on our credit card statement. A dinner at an upscale restaurant I had never been to. A night at a boutique hotel in the city. When I asked Derek about these, his reaction was explosive. He slammed his fist on the table and demanded to know why I was snooping through our finances. He said I had no right to question how he spent money that he earned. He called me controlling and paranoid. I sat there in stunned silence as he stormed out of the room. That was the first time Derek had ever yelled at me like that. That night, I cried myself to sleep while he did not even bother coming to bed. At work, my colleague Nancy started noticing changes in me. Nancy and I had been friends since my first week at the hospital 5 years ago. She was the kind of person who could read people like open books. During a quiet moment in the break room, she sat down across from me and looked me straight in the eyes. She said I looked tired and asked if everything was okay at home. I wanted to tell her. The words were right there, pushing against my lips, desperate to escape. But I could not do it. I mumbled something about Lily going through a difficult phase and the house needing repairs. Nancy did not look convinced, but she did not push. She just said she was there if I ever needed to talk. I thanked her and quickly excused myself before the tears could fall. The night that changed everything started like any other. Derek was supposed to be working late again. I had put Lily to bed and was sitting in the living room scrolling mindlessly through my phone when a notification popped up on the screen. It was from our shared cloud account alerting me that a new device had been added. Curious, I clicked through and discovered that Derek's phone was backing up to our shared storage. And there in his message history, I found the evidence I had been dreading and denying for months. The name Tessa appeared over and over again. The messages were intimate, filled with words Derek had not said to me in years. Pet names, inside jokes, plans to meet, and then the message that made my blood run cold. Tessa had written asking if Derek missed her and if they could see each other that night. The timestamp was from just 2 hours ago. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. My husband was not working late. My husband was with another woman. I do not know how long I sat there staring at the screen, reading and rereading those messages until the words blurred together. The room seemed to spin around me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my husband, it all crumbled in an instant. I thought about waking Lily and driving to my mother's house. I thought about confronting Derek the moment he walked through the door. I thought about pretending I had never seen anything. In the end, I did none of those things. I went to bed, lay in the darkness, and waited. Derek came home at 2 a.m. He slipped into bed without a word. I could smell her perfume on him, that same floral scent from the shirt. I lay perfectly still, my eyes squeezed shut, tears sliding silently down my temples. That night, something inside me broke, but I was not ready to face it. Not yet. For 2 weeks after discovering those messages, I lived in a fog of denial and despair. During the day, I went through the motions of my life. I cared for patients at the hospital. I made breakfast for Lily. I smiled when I was supposed to smile, but inside I was drowning. Every time Derek's phone buzzed, my stomach clenched. Every time he said he was working late, I pictured him with her. I became obsessed with learning everything I could about the woman who was stealing my husband. Her name was Tessa Morgan. I found her easily on social media. She was 29 years old, 6 years younger than me. She worked as an architect at the same company as Derek. Her profile was filled with photos of her traveling to exotic locations, attending fancy parties, living a life that seemed impossibly glamorous. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are with long auburn hair and a smile that looked like it had never known heartbreak. There were no children in her photos, no responsibilities weighing her down. Looking at her pictures, I felt old and worn and completely inadequate. I started comparing myself to her obsessively. I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror cataloging all my flaws. the dark circles under my eyes from years of night shifts and early mornings with Lily, the stretch marks on my stomach from pregnancy, the extra weight I had never quite managed to lose. I understood why Derek wanted her. She was everything I was not: young, free, unburdened. The night I finally confronted Derek, I waited until Lily was asleep. She'd been having nightmares lately, and I had spent an extra hour rubbing her back until she drifted off. Then I walked downstairs to where Derek sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I stood in front of him and asked calmly who Tessa was. The question hung in the air between us. Derek's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, anger, and then something I did not expect: relief. He did not deny it. He did not try to explain it away or make excuses. He looked me in the eye and told me yes, he was seeing someone else. He said Tessa gave him things I could not: youth, excitement, freedom. He said being with me felt like being trapped, like carrying a weight he never asked for. He said he loved. Lily would always be her father, but he did not love me anymore. Maybe he never really had. Each word was a knife, and he just kept stabbing. I stood there frozen, unable to speak, unable to move, as the man I had loved for 8 years dismantled our entire relationship with cold, calculated precision. When I finally found my voice, I asked about Lily. I asked if he had thought about what this would do to her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or shame. But it passed quickly. He said Lily would adjust. Kids were resilient. He said we should talk to a lawyer, figure out custody and finances, make it as clean as possible. Clean. As if a divorce could ever be clean. As if you could slice a family in half without anyone bleeding. After that conversation, Derek stopped pretending. He no longer hid his phone or made excuses for his absences. He would sit at the dinner table texting Tessa right in front of me, a small smile playing on his lips at whatever she wrote. He started criticizing everything about me: the way I cooked dinner, the way I dressed, the way I looked in the morning. He said I had let myself go, that I was boring, that I was nothing compared to Tessa. Every insult chipped away at whatever self-worth I had left. The first time he got physical, I was so shocked I could not process it. We were arguing about something trivial, I cannot even remember what, when I asked him where he had been the night before. He grabbed my shoulders and shoved me hard against the wall. My head hit the plaster with a thud that echoed through the room. He stood there breathing heavily, his face twisted with rage. Then he simply walked away as if nothing had happened. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, my head throbbing, trying to understand how we had gotten here. What I did not know was that Lily had seen everything. She was standing at the top of the stairs, her small face pale with fear. When I looked up and saw her, she turned and ran to her room. I heard her door close, and something inside me cracked. My daughter had watched her father hurt her mother. No child should ever have to witness that. I wanted to go to her, to hold her and tell her everything was okay. But how could I say that when it was so obviously a lie? I should have left that night. I should have packed our bags and driven straight to my mother's house. But I was paralyzed by fear and shame and a desperate hope that somehow things could still be fixed. I called my mother the next day, and when she asked how I was doing, I said fine. The word tasted like acid on my tongue. I told her Derek was busy with work and Lily was doing great in preschool. I wove a tapestry of lies because the truth was too ugly to speak out loud. My brother Marcus texted me occasionally, asking when we could get together for dinner. He was a successful lawyer in the city, busy with his own life, his own cases. I did not want to burden him with my problems. I did not want to admit that my marriage, the thing I had been so proud of, was falling apart. So I made excuses about schedules and promised to find a time soon. Soon never came. The only person keeping me tethered to sanity was Lily. Every morning she would climb into my bed and snuggle against me, her small body warm and trusting. She would wrap her arms around my neck and say she loved me. In those moments, I would close my eyes and breathe her in, this perfect little person who still saw the best in me, who did not know that her mother was breaking apart. I stayed for her. I endured for her. I convinced myself that keeping the family together, even a broken family, was better for her than the alternative. I was wrong. The day that changed everything started with Derek coming home early from work. This was unusual. For months he had been finding every excuse to stay away from the house to spend his evenings with Tessa instead of his family. But that afternoon he walked through the door just as I was helping Lily with a puzzle on the living room floor. His expression was strange, a mixture of excitement and cruelty that made my stomach turn. He told me to put Lily to bed early. He said we needed to talk. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I knew this conversation was coming. I had been dreading it since the night I confronted him about Tessa, but I was not prepared for what he was about to tell me. Once Lily was tucked in, I came back downstairs to find Derek sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He gestured for me to sit across from him like we were business partners about to negotiate a deal. Then he told me the news that knocked the wind out of me. Tessa was pregnant. She was carrying his child. For a moment, I could not breathe. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing closer, the air growing thick and impossible to pull into my lungs. A baby. Derek was going to have another baby with another woman, while still married to me, while still living under the same roof as his daughter. But Derek was not finished. He said he wanted a divorce immediately. He wanted me out of the house. This house, the one we had bought together, the one where Lily had taken her first steps, the one I had poured my heart and savings into, he wanted it for himself and Tessa. He said they would raise their child here, that Tessa would move in as soon as I moved out. I found my voice somewhere in the wreckage of my shock. I told him he could not do this. The house was half mine. I had rights. Lily had rights. I was not going to let him throw us out on the street so he could play house with his mistress. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger. Derek's face darkened. He was not used to me fighting back. For so long, I had been compliant, accepting his cruelty without resistance, hoping that submission would somehow bring back the man I married. But that man was gone, if he had ever existed at all. And I was done being a doormat. He stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He told me I would sign the divorce papers. I would give up the house. I would take whatever pittance he decided to offer, and I would be grateful for it. If I did not, he would make my life a living hell. He would drag out the divorce until I had nothing left. He would fight for custody of Lily just to hurt me. His voice was low and menacing, nothing like the gentle man who had proposed to me in that park so many years ago. I stood my ground. I told him I was not afraid of him. I told him I would get a lawyer, that I would fight for what was rightfully mine, that I would not let him destroy me. The words came out stronger than I felt. Inside, I was terrified, but I refused to let him see it. What happened next is seared into my memory with painful clarity. Derek crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and slapped me across the face so hard that I spun and fell to the floor. The impact of the slap was nothing compared to the shock. In all our years together, through all our arguments, he had never hit me like that. I looked up at him from the floor, my cheek burning, my vision blurred with tears, and saw a stranger staring back at me. He grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. I cried out in pain as his fingers dug into my flesh. I begged him to stop to think about what he was doing, to remember that Lily was sleeping upstairs. But he was beyond reason. He shoved me into the counter and I felt the edge dig into my lower back. I tried to push past him to get to the door to escape. He blocked my path. Then he grabbed a fistful of my hair and dragged me into the kitchen. I was screaming, begging, pleading for him to let me go. He threw me to the floor and I hit the tile hard, my hip and shoulder absorbing most of the impact. I tried to crawl away, but he was too fast. He stood over me and the look in his eyes was something I will never forget. It was rage pure and uncontrolled, mixed with a cold determination that told me he was about to do something terrible. He said if I would not leave on my own, he would make sure I could never walk out of this house. I did not understand what he meant until he raised his foot. I screamed and tried to roll away, but I was not fast enough. His foot came down on my left leg with all his weight behind it. The sound of my bone breaking is something I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. It was a crack sharp and final, followed by a pain so intense that my vision went white. I heard myself screaming, but it sounded far away like it was coming from someone else. I looked down at my leg and saw it bent at an angle that legs should not bend. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, waves of agony rolling through my body, making it impossible to think, to move, to breathe. Derek stepped back and looked at what he had done. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, at how far he had gone. But it passed quickly. He told me this was my fault. If I had just agreed to leave, if I had not been so stubborn, this would not have happened. Then he pulled out his phone and walked into the other room, leaving me lying on the cold kitchen floor with a broken leg. I do not know how long I lay there. Minutes felt like hours. The pain consumed everything. I tried to drag myself toward the counter where my phone sat, but every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my body. I could not reach it. I was going to die here, I thought. I was going to bleed internally or go into shock or simply give up and let the darkness take me. My last thought would be of Lily sleeping peacefully upstairs, not knowing her mother was dying in the kitchen below. Then I heard the sound that changed everything. Small footsteps on the stairs. My daughter's voice, soft and scared, calling out for me. Lily had been asleep when the yelling started. She told me later that she had been having a dream about butterflies when loud noises pulled her awake. She lay in bed for a while, her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest, listening to the angry voices coming from downstairs. She heard her father shouting. She heard her mother crying. And then she heard a scream, a terrible scream that made her whole body go cold. Most 5-year-olds would have stayed in bed too frightened to move. But Lily was not most 5-year-olds. She climbed out of bed, her small feet touching the cold floor, and crept to her bedroom door. The house was quiet now, which somehow seemed worse than the screaming. She opened the door and peered into the hallway. All the lights were off except for a glow coming from downstairs. Lily descended the stairs one careful step at a time, gripping the railing with both hands. She was terrified, but something stronger than fear pulled her forward. She needed to find her mommy. She needed to make sure her mommy was okay. The living room was a mess. A lamp had been knocked over. Cushions were scattered on the floor. But mommy was not there. Lily kept walking, following the light that spilled from the kitchen doorway. When she stepped into the kitchen and saw me lying on the floor, she stopped. Her small face went pale. Her eyes grew wide with horror she was too young to fully understand. She ran to me, her bare feet slapping against the tile. She dropped to her knees beside me and put her tiny hands on my face. She kept saying, "Mommy," over and over, asking why I was on the floor, asking what was wrong with my leg, asking why I was crying. I tried to speak, but the pain was so overwhelming that words would not form. I just looked at my daughter, my brave, beautiful daughter, and prayed that she would not remember this night. But Lily was not panicking. Even at 5 years old, she possessed a calmness that amazed me. She had seen me come home from the hospital talking about emergencies and how important it was to stay focused when things went wrong. She had listened when I taught her about calling 911, when I made her memorize our address, when I explained that sometimes grown-ups need help and children have to be brave. She asked me what she should do. Through the haze of pain, I managed to tell her, "Call 911, baby. Tell them mommy is hurt. Tell them our address. Do you remember our address?" She nodded, her little face set with determination. She stood up, looked around the kitchen until she spotted my phone on the counter and dragged a chair over so she could reach it. Her fingers, still chubby with baby fat, navigated to the phone icon. She pressed 9, then 1, then 1. When the dispatcher answered, Lily spoke in a clear, steady voice that broke my heart and filled it with pride at the same time. She said her mommy was hurt. Her mommy was lying on the kitchen floor. Her mommy's leg looked wrong. She gave our address perfectly the way I had drilled into her over and over just in case. The dispatcher asked if anyone else was home, and Lily said her daddy was there, but he was in the other room and would not help. She said the words with a matter-of-fact simplicity that was devastating. After she hung up, Lily remembered something else. Our neighbor, Mrs. Helen, always gave her cookies when she came over to play. Mrs. Helen was nice. Mrs. Helen would help. Lily ran to the back door, unlocked it the way she had seen me do 100 times, and sprinted across our backyard to Mrs. Helen's house. Helen was 65 years old and had lived in that house for over 30 years. She was a retired school teacher who had never had children of her own, but treated every child in the neighborhood like a grandchild. When she heard the frantic knocking on her back door, she rushed to open it. There stood Lily barefoot and shivering in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face. Lily grabbed Helen's hand and pulled her. She said Mommy was hurt and on the floor and there was something wrong with her leg. Helen did not hesitate. She followed Lily back across the yard and into our kitchen. When she saw me lying there, she gasped and immediately knelt beside me. She checked my pulse, talked to me in a soothing voice, told me that help was coming, that I needed to stay awake. Derek appeared in the doorway. He looked startled to see Helen there. He started to say something, probably some excuse about me falling, but Helen fixed him with a look that could have cut through steel. She told him she had heard everything through the walls. She had heard the yelling and the screaming and the crash. She told him to stay away from me and that the police were going to hear about this. For a moment, Derek looked like he might argue or even become violent again. But then the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. His face went pale. He muttered something and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, into the night. I never saw him walk freely again. The paramedics arrived minutes later. They burst through the front door with their equipment and training, and suddenly the kitchen was full of people asking questions and checking vitals and preparing to move me. Lily stood against the wall, watching everything with those big, solemn eyes. One of the paramedics tried to lead her away, but she refused to leave. She said she had to stay with her mommy. They loaded me onto a stretcher, securing my leg as best they could. The pain when they moved me was excruciating, but I kept my eyes on Lily. Helen had wrapped a blanket around her small shoulders and was holding her hand. She promised me she would bring Lily to the hospital, that she would not leave her side. As they wheeled me toward the ambulance, I reached out my hand. Lily ran forward and grabbed it. I whispered to her that she had saved Mommy. She had been so brave, braver than anyone in the whole world. Lily squeezed my hand and said she loved me. Then the paramedics lifted me into the ambulance and the doors closed, and the last thing I saw before the siren started was my daughter's face in the flashing red lights, watching her mother be taken away. The emergency room at County General Hospital was both familiar and terrifying that night. I had walked these halls hundreds of times as a nurse, but I had never been wheeled through them as a patient. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, the voices around me too loud, everything distorted by pain and shock and fear. Dr. Nguyen was the orthopedic surgeon on call. He was a colleague I had worked with many times, a skilled doctor with a calm demeanor that put patients at ease. When he saw me being wheeled in recognition, flickered across his face, followed by concern. He came to my side, immediately looked at my leg, and began issuing orders to the nurses surrounding me. As they prepped me for surgery, Dr. Nguyen leaned close and asked me quietly what had happened. For a moment, I considered lying. The instinct was still there, that protective impulse to hide the truth, to shield Derek from consequences, to pretend that everything was normal. But then I thought of Lily. I thought of her brave little voice on the phone with 911. I thought of how close I had come to dying on that kitchen floor. And I told him the truth. My husband did this to me. He broke my leg because I would not sign divorce papers. I said the words out loud and something shifted inside me. The shame I had been carrying for so long began to loosen its grip. Dr. Nguyen's expression hardened with anger, not at me, but for me. He said he was required to report this to the police, that this was a case of domestic violence, and that I had rights and protections. I nodded, too exhausted to speak anymore, and let them wheel me into surgery. The procedure took over 3 hours. My tibia was fractured in 2 places, and they had to insert a metal rod to stabilize the bone. I would need months of physical therapy. I might always walk with a slight limp, but I was alive. Thanks to my daughter, I was alive. When I woke up in the recovery room, the first thing I saw was my mother's face. Brenda had driven 2 hours through the night the moment Helen called her. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands trembling as she stroked my hair. She kept apologizing, saying she should have known, should have seen the signs, should have protected me. I told her it was not her fault. I had hidden it too well. I had been too ashamed to ask for help. My brother Marcus arrived the next morning. He had flown in on the first available flight, still wearing his court suit, his briefcase clutched in his hand. When he saw me in that hospital bed, his face crumpled. For a moment, he was not the confident attorney I knew, but my big brother, the one who used to chase away my nightmares when we were kids. He hugged me gently, careful not to jostle my leg, and promised me that Derek would pay for what he had done. The police came to take my statement later that day. Officer Patricia Hayes was a woman about my age, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had worked domestic violence cases for over a decade and knew exactly the right questions to ask. I told her everything from the first signs of the affair to the emotional abuse to the escalating violence to that final brutal night. She wrote it all down in her notebook, then looked at me and said I was not alone anymore. She was going to make sure Derek faced justice. They arrested Derek that same evening. He had gone to Tessa's apartment after fleeing our house, apparently expecting her to shelter him. But Tessa wanted nothing to do with a wanted man. The police found him trying to check into a motel on the outskirts of town. He was charged with felony assault causing serious bodily harm, a crime that carried significant prison time. He tried to claim I had fallen down the stairs, that he had nothing to do with my injury. But Helen's testimony contradicted his lies. She had heard everything through the walls. And Lily, with the help of a child psychologist specially trained for these situations, gave her own account of what she had witnessed. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital stays, legal proceedings, and difficult conversations. Marcus took over my divorce case filing papers before I was even discharged from the hospital. He was relentless, using every tool at his disposal to ensure I received fair treatment. Given the circumstances, the domestic violence and the criminal charges, the court granted me a temporary protective order. Derek was not allowed within 500 feet of me or Lily. The criminal trial happened 3 months later. I had to sit in that courtroom and recount the worst night of my life in front of strangers. I had to look at Derek, who sat at the defendant's table in his orange jumpsuit, and describe how he had broken my leg while I begged him to stop. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. But I did it for myself and for Lily and for every woman who had ever been told she was not strong enough to fight back. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict. Derek was sentenced to 4 years in state prison for aggravated assault. The judge cited the premeditated nature of the attack and the presence of a child in the home as aggravating factors. When the sentence was read, Derek finally looked scared. The man who had terrorized me for months finally understood that actions have consequences. The divorce was finalized while Derek was awaiting sentencing. Marcus made sure I received everything I was entitled to, and more. Full custody of Lily with no visitation rights for Derek for at least 2 years. The proceeds from the sale of our house, a portion of Derek's retirement savings, child support that would continue until Lily turned 18. It was not revenge I wanted, it was security. It was the ability to start over without constantly looking over my shoulder. Tessa disappeared from the picture almost immediately after Derek's arrest. She terminated her pregnancy and transferred to a different office across the country. I never saw her again, never spoke to her, never even learned if she felt any remorse for her part in destroying my family. In the end, she did not matter. She was just a symptom of a deeper sickness in my marriage, a sickness that had been there long before she came along. The day Derek was transported to prison, I stood outside the courthouse with Lily's hand in mine. Reporters wanted statements, but I had nothing to say to them. I just wanted to go home, wherever home was going to be now. As we walked to the car, Lily looked up at me and asked if the bad man was going away. I told her, yes, baby. The bad man was going away for a long time. She nodded solemnly, then asked if we could get ice cream. I laughed for the first time in months and said yes, we could definitely get ice cream. The first few months after the trial were some of the darkest of my life. The physical pain from my injury was constant, a throbbing reminder of what had happened every time I tried to walk. But it was the emotional pain that nearly destroyed me. I had nightmares almost every night replaying that scene in the kitchen over and over. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, convinced that Derek was standing over me. My mother insisted that Lily and I move in with her during my recovery. Her house was small but filled with warmth, the same house where I had grown up, where I had felt safe and loved as a child. Being there helped, but it also made me feel like a failure. I was 32 years old, divorced, disabled, and living with my mother. Not exactly the life I had imagined for myself. Lily adjusted better than I expected. Children are remarkably adaptable, and my daughter had already proven she was tougher than anyone her age should have to be. She started at a new preschool near my mother's house and quickly made friends. She loved helping her grandmother in the garden, loved the cat that wandered into the yard every afternoon, loved the routine and stability that had been missing from her life for so long. But I could see the shadows in her eyes. She had witnessed things no child should ever see. She had heard things no child should ever hear. At my insistence, we started taking her to a child psychologist who specialized in trauma. Dr. Sarah, as Lily called her, used play therapy to help Lily process her experiences. Slowly, carefully, the shadows began to fade. My own therapy was harder. The psychologist I saw challenged me to confront the beliefs I had held about myself for so long, that I was not good enough, that I deserved what happened, that I should have done more, been more, tried harder to save my marriage. She helped me understand that Derek's choices were not my fault, that his violence was about his need for control, not about anything I did or failed to do. It took months before I started to believe her. Physical therapy was its own kind of torture. Learning to walk again with a metal rod in my leg was painful and frustrating and humiliating. There were days I wanted to give up, to just accept that I would spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. But then I would think of Lily, of the life I wanted to give her, and I would push through one more exercise, one more lap around the therapy room, one more small victory. 6 months after that terrible night, I took my first steps without assistance. They were shaky and uncertain, and I had to grip the parallel bars so tightly my knuckles turned white. But I did it. The physical therapist cheered. My mother cried. Lily jumped up and down, clapping her hands and shouting that Mommy was walking. In that moment, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time: hope. Gradually, I rebuilt my life. I used the money from the divorce settlement to put a down payment on a small apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. It was nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was ours. Lily helped me pick out the curtains and arrange her stuffed animals on her new bed. We painted her room lavender, the same color Derek had painted her nursery all those years ago, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like a new beginning. I returned to work at the hospital on a part-time basis. My colleagues welcomed me back with open arms and careful hugs. Nancy cried when she saw me walk through the doors. Doctor, Nguyen stopped by to check on my progress and told me he was proud of how far I had come. For so long, I had felt invisible and worthless. Now I was surrounded by people who saw me, who valued me, who reminded me every day that I mattered. The relationship between Lily and me grew even stronger through our shared trauma. We developed little rituals that became sacred. Every night before bed, I would tuck her in and say, "I love you, my brave girl." And she would respond, "I love you too, Mommy. You are my superhero." It started as a way to reassure her, but it became something we both needed, a reminder that we had survived, a promise that we would always have each other. On Lily's 6th birthday, we had a small party in our new apartment. My mother was there, and Marcus with his girlfriend, and Nancy and a few of Lily's new friends from school. We decorated with balloons and streamers, and I baked a lopsided chocolate cake that Lily declared was the best cake in the whole world. As I watched her blow out her candles surrounded by people who loved her, I realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the Instagram perfect life I had tried to maintain with Derek, but something real and messy and beautiful. The past year has taught me things I never wanted to learn. I learned that the person you love most can become the person who hurts you worst. I learned that strength is not about never falling down, but about getting back up every time you do. I learned that asking for help is not weakness, but wisdom. And I learned that sometimes the people who save us are not the ones we expect. I still walk with a slight limp, especially when the weather is cold or damp. The metal rod in my leg sets off airport security detectors and aches when I stand too long. These are permanent reminders of what I survived, but I no longer see them as marks of shame. They are badges of courage. They are proof that I am still here. Lily is thriving now. She is in first grade learning to read and write, making friends being a normal little girl. She still sees Dr. Sarah occasionally, and there are still nights when she crawls into my bed because of bad dreams. But those nights are fewer now. She is healing. We both are. I do not know what the future holds. Maybe I will fall in love again someday with someone who treats me with the respect and kindness I deserve. Maybe I will advance in my nursing career, or go back to school, or discover new passions I never knew I had. The possibilities feel endless in a way they never did before. What I know for certain is this: I survived. My daughter saved my life, and in doing so, she taught me that I was worth saving. That is a gift I will carry with me forever. If you are watching this and you are in a situation like mine, please hear me. You are not alone. You are not to blame. And you deserve so much better than what you are receiving. There is help available. There are people who will believe you, who will fight for you, who will stand beside you as you reclaim your life. You just have to be brave enough to reach out. And I know how hard that is. I know the fear and the shame and the 1,000 reasons your mind invents to stay. But I promise you the other side of that fear is freedom. Lily is sitting across from me right now drawing at the kitchen table. I ask her what she is making. She holds up the paper to show me. It is a picture of two people, one big and one small, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. She says it is me and her and that we are happy. I look at my daughter, at her gap-toothed smile and her hopeful eyes, and I know she is right. We are happy. Imperfectly, beautifully, bravely happy. And that is more than enough. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone unexpected save your life, whether literally or figuratively? Who was that person for you? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe that by sharing our experiences, we help each other heal. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. If you want to hear more stories of survival and strength, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message today, please share this video with them. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community. Whatever you are facing right now, I want you to know that you are stronger than you think. You are worthy of love and safety and happiness, and no matter how dark the night gets, the sun will rise again. Take care of yourselves and each other. Until next time.